Being in armament and being in ordnance and stuff, we had a lot of interaction with people who were going to Vietnam or had come back from Vietnam. And so we were all pretty well aware, the folks that I worked with and everything, we were all pretty well aware of the patrol boats, the PBRs, and what their function was. And, of course, there was a lot of legendary stuff floating around. And we did a lot of work with the SEAL teams even before I got to Vietnam because there was a lot of training and stuff going on. So we interacted with them quite a bit. And of course, a lot of them in the SEAL teams did multiple tours with the boats in Vietnam. Their tours, the SEAL team tours, were 3 to 6 months, something like that. And they would go because they did multiple trips over, and so they didn't stay as long as we did. Our traditional tour was a year at first, and then every re-enlistment or every extension was 6 months. So,
Right. Yeah. Now, did you volunteer for the patrol boats with the intention of going to Vietnam?
Yep.
Yeah.
That was the idea.
You mentioned the SEALs, and as part of your work there on these patrol boats in the Delta, you participate in a number of SEAL operations. My understanding is primarily getting the SEALs to where they need to get so that they can get off the boat into the jungle, picking them up, and then also providing fire support. But when you think about the SEALs and these operations you did with the SEALs, what are the things that come to mind? So far as you know, and I know that the SEALs aren't going to tell you really in detail what they're doing, but so far as you could gather from just what you're observing, what were these SEAL teams doing that you were involved with?
Well, actually, we knew pretty well what they were doing and what the function, what the purpose of their operations were, because we were an integral part of what they were doing. So we had to know what their objectives were and how they were going to accomplish the objectives and so forth. Because we had to be in the right place at the right time to be able to support them as much as possible. But generally speaking, I'm get off the subject just a little bit, but I'll get back and answer your question. I got out of the service in '68, and I got back in during Desert Storm, late '80s, in the Army. This time in the Special Forces. So I stayed in to get my 20 years in the Army Special Forces. So I worked with the SEALs again during that time. In my later deployments, I spent a couple of years in Afghanistan during that process too. Working with the SEALs during that process, I realized that their operations were extremely technical and very involved and had a lot of rehearsing going on and so forth. So a single operation would take a good minimum of 2 to 3 weeks to get ready to implement and ready to go with. In contrast, in Vietnam, and getting more to your point and your question, they would come up with an operation one night sitting around a table drinking beer saying, why don't we go out and do this? And by 5 o'clock the next morning, they were ready to launch.
Wow.
So, yeah, it was a completely different atmosphere. So, again, they would be sitting around one night, and they did a lot of ambush assassination missions. They would take out certain integral Viet Cong, North Vietnamese operators, and the way they would do it is go out and set up in certain areas in the jungle, in an area where they knew this person was going to traverse at a certain time, and they just jump out and whack him, Yeah. And quick as that was over, they'd signal us to come back and pick them up, and we'd go back. But they'd be sitting around one night and come up with this operation, and they'd call us and say, hey, we're going to need you 5 o'clock in the morning and pick us up and insert us at certain coordinates. And, so we would get in on the operation at that point. So it was a really completely drastically different set of operations then.
As compared to Afghanistan, where there's a whole lot of planning and training.
Oh, yeah, a lot of planning and a lot of dress rehearsals and everything that would go on over there. And today, I think it's much, much more involved than that. So.
Sure. When you think about these SEALs that you're taking in and taking out of these operations in the Mekong.
Mhm.
And understanding each SEAL is going to have his own personality. But when you look back on them, did they seem like they were, did they seem like they had kind of a collective personality that was
To an
distinguishable
extent,
from others?
yeah, yeah. To an extent, they did. And even today, the SEALs and most special operations people have a collective mindset. And again, just like you say, they are all individuals and so forth. But in Vietnam, the SEALs would all the SEAL teams were to certain levels attached to the PBRs because we would have whatever PBR group or section was over there, they'd always have at least one SEAL team attached to that section because we were basically their wheels, to get them where they needed to go and pick them up and everything. So we were closely associated with them. So we got to know a lot of them. I think I told a story in the book about the one kid that was from Mississippi. One of the SEAL guys was from Mississippi. And of course, when you ran across somebody that lived close to where you came from, you developed a pretty good relationship with them, talking about home and so forth. So he and I got to be pretty good friends while he was there. And one night we took him out on an operation, and again, it was an assassination mission. They were going out to kill some tax collector or somebody going around getting money from people. And we took them in and dropped them off. And what we would do is they would come on the boats, and immediately, there'd usually be six of them, half a dozen of them would come on the boats, and they'd have all their gear. They'd have at least one local South Vietnamese with them, soldier with them. And they would just kind of drop to the deck and sit there quietly and out of the way while we did all of the work to get them where they needed to go. And then once we got them there, we would, at a high speed, high enough that we could handle, we would hit the beach. Usually it was pretty thick with vines and stuff. So we would just kind of hit the deck or hit the beach as hard as we could to kind of drive through the vines to get the deck bow up as close as we could to hard ground. They would immediately jump off the front of the boat, and within 10 seconds, they would be completely off the boat. We would back up, we'd back up in the middle of the river and just sit there drifting until we got their signal to either give them support fire or come back and pick them up. Well, we knew where they were going to be from the coordinates. So we would set up our support fire if we had to use it to be either side of them, a distance and so forth. So they knew not to go into that area. We would back off and we'd sit there, and we generally knew about how long it was going to take for them to get their work done. And then as soon as we would hear some fire and so forth, and we'd get a signal if we needed to support them or not. But if not, we would just sit and wait. And then pretty soon we'd get the flashing lights from the beach, and we'd hit the beach right about the same area. They'd jump on board, go back to the back of the boat and drop, and we'd back off and head back home. Well, this one particular night, my friend came back on board, and he went to the back of the boat with the rest of them. We backed off, and we got heading back home. And while we were on the way back home, I went back to talk to him, see how everything went. And he had a big knot right in the middle of his forehead. I mean, it was like a big goose egg type thing.
Mm.
And he was kind of laughing about it. And I asked him what happened, and it turned out he got hit in the forehead with a grenade.
Wow.
And it was a homemade grenade. The VC made their own grenades out of whatever they could come up with. And he got hit in the forehead and then dropped to his feet. And he said he was saying his prayers because he knew that was the end, and he didn't go off.
How often did you do operations with the SEALs? Would it be a weekly thing, a few times a week?
At least they would do at least one operation a week. And again, they didn't go over there with a set of objectives. When they got over there, they got a pass off from the team that they were relieving, and they picked up from there, and they started, going through intelligence reports and getting a lot of information from us. Because see, one of the things that we would do throughout our work was pick up people and interrogate them and get information that we could get. So whenever we got some valuable data or information from somebody, we'd pass it off to them. And if they wanted to do something with it, they would. And they would work up a little operation, and they would, it'd usually take more than 3 or 4 hours, but they'd sit down and go over a little operation with us, and then we'd launch. We'd hit the button and go.
Were these SEALs kind of independent operators? I mean, was there anybody who really controlled them, or were they free to kind of, manage their own affairs?
Yep, pretty much. Very little, they were very closed off from the rest of the operation. Of course, there was required connections and so forth and combo back and forth between them and command, but if they wanted to do something, they just pretty much take off and do it. That was one thing that was kind of neat about Vietnam in a way, if you can use that terminology. In just about any area of Vietnam, and I'm sure a lot of your other vets have told you this, there's very little oversight. If you decided within your own little group, hey, wouldn't it be great if we did X? Nobody was going to tell you you can't do X or even ask you what X was. You just go out and do it. And if it was successful, somebody up the chain would claim credit for it. And if it was not successful, you just passed it off and went on and did Y or Z or whatever. So, but that was kind of fun in a way to have that freedom, have that flexibility. With the special ops people that were over there had the majority of that flexibility and that freedom to do stuff.
I wonder if that was what you're describing, kind of a fairly loose situation where soldiers and sailors can kind of come up with their own operations, almost a kind of a free-for-all thing. I wonder if that was especially true down in the Delta, just for reasons of, you're on all these canals, and it's just such a different feel from, say, up in I Corps.
Oh yeah, much different. It probably was a lot more loose, a lot more flexibility there too, for the reasons that you're mentioning. Because we were on the ground and we could see things that people in I Corps and especially back in the States and so forth couldn't see. So they kind of depended on little guys to come up with ideas for them. This might work here, this might work over here.